everyone, welcome to the channel. Today I thought we could talk about preparing for an exam if you're going to the PhD exam, but as the external examiner rather than the student. Hey, I hope things are going well for you. We are now in semester 2 at my university, so we finished the marking month and we're now back into regular teaching. But I thought today we'd jump in and have a look at the role of an external examiner for PhD students. So one of the really nice parts of the academic job, or at least I think it's one of the really nice parts of the job, is the chance to go and read theses from other students that other students have written at other universities and then to examine them on their research. Now, here in the UK, our process for examining PhD students might look a bit different to the one that you have potentially in your country. We do it by having typically 2 examiners in the room. So there'll be the internal examiner and the external examiner. I think I've made a previous video on this. I'll put it in the links if I have. So the internal examiner is an academic who is based at the same university as the PhD candidate who's presenting their dissertation for examination. The external examiner needs to come from a different university, and that's there to ensure that you have, upheld rigor and good standing, and you're assessing the research integrity independently from the university at which the candidate is presenting and being assessed. The internal will obviously maintain those things as well, but you basically have an internal from the university, the same as the student, and an external from outside the university. You may also have in the room a chair. I have been a chair in PhD assessments. So if your internal and external examiners, if they don't potentially have a certain number of examinations that meet a certain requirement perhaps, or perhaps they don't have the familiarity with the UK-based system because they're an examiner who's coming from a different country, you may have a chair in the room. The chair does not examine the student or the work. The chair is there to ensure that the process is followed and the regulations are upheld, and to ensure that due diligence happens within that examination. And of course, most importantly, you will also have the student who is there presenting their research. So, as I said, I've been an external examiner now at different universities. So my subject is physics, so I'm always examining students who are presenting a physics-based PhD dissertation. Different universities in the UK will do it broadly in a very similar way. Sometimes examiners like to meet and have lunch ahead of doing the exam. So they'll get together, the internal, the external, they'll have lunch together, they might chat about the presented dissertation, and then they will examine the student. Sometimes internal and externals like to meet in the morning, they might have a cup of coffee, and then they'll start the exam, and actually they'll try to have that exam completed, so maybe they'll go for lunch afterwards. But yeah, anyway, it varies slightly from kind of university and personal preference between the people who are doing the exam. It's quite strict in the fact that you can't have your supervisors of the student present during the examination, at least not in the ones that I've attended or been in. So the student is there by themselves, representing their own research and their own work, and they don't have their supervisor sitting there listening into them. That is a bit different, I think, to how it can happen in different countries. Also, we in the UK, we don't have to do a formal presentation in front of an audience. So again, I know that in certain locations you have to give a, if you like, presentation to a panel of people who are watching it, and that presentation can be opened up to your friends and family, so they might want to come and to listen to you present your work. And then you will take questions in front of that audience as well. So that's probably quite nerve-wracking before then potentially having some kind of closed meeting separately. In the UK, as I said, typically we don't do that. It's often between 2, 3 or 4 people within a kind of closed room environment. So yeah, jumping in, what do you then do if you're the external examiner? So the first thing is somebody at another university will write to you and they will say, hey, well, maybe not hey, they'll start in a formal way, but they will basically say they have a student who's about to present their dissertation for consideration for the award of a PhD, and they are looking for somebody to externally examine that work, and they would very much like it if you could be that person. And they will give you a brief synopsis of what the research is about. And it's that point that you then have to decide whether you think you're suited to be able to examine that research work. So obviously, the supervisors of the student have picked you to be the external examiner because they think you are suited to examine the research for that particular project. But again, you as an examiner, it's important to check that you agree and that you also feel that you, within your skill set, are comfortable and have the knowledge and expertise to examine that particular body of research. If you do, which is great, you then need to consider timelines. So again, it will vary from institution to institution. Typical timescales are typically between 4 and 12 weeks after the student hands in their dissertation. And as an external examiner, you're perfectly entitled to reply and say, yes, I would be very happy to examine this work, but I can't do it until this particular point in my calendar. Now, most universities won't let their students wait beyond 3 months after handing in their dissertation. So there is a time limit on it. You can't postpone for like months and months and months. You do need to do that exam within a certain time frame of the student submitting their work. But at the same time, you don't need to do it next week. Dissertations take time to review, to read, to reflect upon. This isn't something you can turn around, at least in my experience, very quickly. So you have to be, as an external examiner, quite realistic about when you think you're going to be able to actually facilitate doing that examination. So if that all goes to plan, you then send off your details to the university that has asked you to do the examination. They will typically want to know, how many other students have you examined? What is your track record and experience of doing these kind of assessments? And then between yourself and the internal examiner and the student, and potentially the student supervisor, you will agree a mutual date, a mutual location, a mutual start time, and that will be the time that you're going ahead for this PhD examination viva. Then you will get sent a whole lot of paperwork to fill in. So you'll get paperwork to fill in based, as I said, on your credentials, but you will also be asked typically to fill in paperwork relating to the dissertation before you go and do the viva. And that's quite important. So you now have a period of time to read the body of work by the student, to analyse it, to critically reflect on it, to think about the novelty of that particular piece of research, the quality of the presented results potentially, the analysis that piece of work has been through, and then you will draw your own opinions and reflections on that body of study, and you do that independently from the internal examiner. And then that is really important then, because then you have these two independent viewpoints that you can then put together, and those must be kind of discussed and exchanged before you actually do the examination with the student. And that's vital. You need to have different academic expertise looking at the work, coming from different perspectives. So that's kind of key. Then on the actual day itself, sometimes you will travel up the night before if you're doing an early start. The external examiner typically will travel to the university institution of the student candidate. Yet occasionally you'll have them done over online platforms, but it's I think personally it's easier, it's nicer to do these examinations in person. So the external examiner will travel to the location of the student and the internal supervisor. So that might mean that you go up the night before if you have an early start. Then the day of the exam, you will meet with your internal and you will have a discussion about the body of work. And then the student will be invited to join you, and then you will start the examination. And it's not like a yes or no type exam, at least not within physics. you are discussing that body of work. And it can take some time. Typically these PhD exams will last for multiple hours. So you could be going for like 3 hours, you might be going for 3.5, 4.5 hours. These can take a prolonged period of time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You are literally discussing somebody's work that has taken 3.5, 4 years if they've done it full time, potentially 6 or 7 years if they've done it part time. And you, as the external and the internal, you've both read that work in detail, in depth. Obviously, the student is presenting that work that they've written in detail and in depth. So there can be a lot to talk about. So as an external examiner, you're looking, first of all, to see, is the student familiar with this work? Have they done this research that they're presenting in front of you? Is this research of novel and good standing? So are they presenting a contribution that is unique and novel into their particular research field, their research community? Has that research potentially been recognised by that community? So often that is journal papers, peer-reviewed publications, going to conferences, potentially winning awards. You're looking for these kind of markers to make sure that the work is of a good standard. So you're checking that the student has completed the work, that the work is novel and is addressing research questions and adding to the research community, and that it is, of decent standard and has been conducted to a high reputable standard within that research field. So yeah, that is a kind of like your setup to it. And then the outcomes will depend very much on what happens within the exam. And I guess looking at the length of time, we can talk about PhD outcomes from examinations in a different video. But I thought it might be fun just to share a little bit about from the UK side, or from the UK side, I guess, in my experience within the sciences, within the STEM subjects, what it's like to be an external examiner for a PhD student. If you have been an external examiner within your institution, your frameworks, I would love to know your experiences. How did you find the process? Have you been the internal examiner? Have you been the chair too for these PhD experiences? Maybe you're in a completely different system where they do the large-scale presentations. Maybe you're a PhD student nervously awaiting to go through their discussion. Let me know in the comments. It's really cool to hear all our different perspectives. I hope things are going really well. I know some of us are starting a semester now. Some of us might already be fully teaching and have been teaching for several weeks, based on whether we're on a term system or a semester system. But I hope that this month is started well and is continuing to go well for you. Look after yourselves, and I will see you back on here for another academic video soon. All right, guys. Bye.